Welcome back to Advanced Advanced Composition. Professor Kent Lee here. We're going to kind of jump into the next unit on kind of professional writing, and that kind of covers several kind of types of writing that you may not have, that are not your standard academic writing types, and some kind of hybrid types between business and academic writing. So briefly, think about this and talk to each other. What are differences between business writing and academic writing? What are some common types of business writing? Okay, in business writing, it tends to be more semi-formal, not quite as formal as academic writing in terms of vocabulary, sentence structure. So some of the stuff I talked about in the past video, like using first person, second person, you get more of that in business writing. For example, maybe more phrasal verbs, more informal word choice sometimes, depending on the context. It can be a range actually from kind of semi-formal to formal, maybe sometimes informal, memos and letters. So we have, for example, some kinds of what I call professional writing, which show mixtures of business and academic elements. So here's kind of some common types of business and professional writing. So what do you know about these? What are these? What are these used for? And what are some style differences or differences in structure between these and the academic writing that you're maybe used to? So what are these, and what do you know about these things? Pause and discuss for a while. Okay, so business letters, these tend to be semi-formal or formal, and then memos or memorandum, like for maybe a short letter or maybe something you send out, kind of a short notice in a company or for a business meeting or something like that. A memo, that's short for memorandum. Literally in Latin, it means something to be remembered. Remember this. In other words, a notice, kind of a short notice, is a memo or note. The memos can be formal, informal. One thing that you notice if you look at business letters, and we'll see examples later with cover letters, is the paragraphing is different. So in academic writing, you have a paragraph indent. The first line is indented about 10 or 12 spaces to the right, and then the line spacing is usually like double spaced or 1.5 line spacing. Why do we do that, by the way, in academic writing? Well, so that we professors can grade more easily and write comments. We can read it better. All right, résumés. Now, this is a word from French. It's a French word for like summary. Sorry about the siren, if you can hear that. So because it's from French, we want to distinguish résumé from the verb resume. To start again, it's not a resume. You need an accent mark. To be formal, you put 2 accent marks. An accent mark on each E, résumé. Or semi-formal, you need at least 1 accent mark on the final E, the last E. You need at least 1 accent mark to indicate that it's résumé, not resume. Okay, you use a résumé to apply to a company. You don't use a resume. Don't make a mistake. Looks sloppy if you don't do that. If you want to impress people with French pronunciation, it's résumé, if you want to show off. Okay, so résumés. We'll talk about résumés later. Résumés in a little bit, probably next week. We'll also talk about CVs. So CV stands for curriculum vitae, or vita for short. So this is Latin, and it stands for course, curriculum, course of one's life. So vita is life. So sometimes they say vita for short. Vita means life. So in Latin, changing the A to AE is a possessive. can also be plural. Formula, formulae, if you want to be fancy and formal, formula, formulae. So I can make it plural, or in this case it makes it possessive. So curriculum vitae, course of one's life. Vita is life, like vitamin, vital, okay, it's life. So a CV is like a resume. Now in Europe they tend to use CV, the word CV, for resume, like you're applying for a company job. But usually in English it's different. What is different between a resume and a CV? Do you have any idea? How are they different? Any ideas? Okay, a resume is applying for a regular company job. How long is a resume? Usually 1 page. A CV is applying for an academic job or a teaching job or a research job. It's an academic resume, basically. In English, a CV is an academic resume. And it's different. How long can a CV be? As long as you can make it. Show off. Make it as long as you want. You can go online and see some famous scholars, and you can see their CVs online, and some just go on and on and on for miles and miles. Like, it just never ends because they've done so much. God, you must drink a lot of coffee. How do you publish so many papers? Okay, so a CV is an academic resume. We'll talk about that later. Cover letter. What's a cover letter? Well, it's a letter you send in along with your resume or CV to apply for a job. First of all, why is it called a cover letter? Well, in the old days, you would actually mail in hard copies, printed out copies, before everything was online or electronic. You would print out your resume on some really nice fancy paper. You'd go to a print shop and have it photocopy there with some really fancy, nice textured, thick paper, nice texture, very beautiful looking paper. And then you'd put your cover letter on top of it. So it's called a cover letter because it goes on top of your resume. And you stick it into a nice big envelope and mail it to the company, and then hope that they call you for an interview. So what's the difference? Well, a resume is a listing of your qualifications and experience. The cover letter is more of an explanation of your intentions. Why are you applying? Why do you want to work for the company, and what can you bring to the company? And it's not just repeating what's on your resume, but it's talking about your strengths and qualities. That's stuff that's not apparent from the resume. The resume lists your qualifications in terms of your experience, your work history, your degrees, your accomplishments, your achievements. But the cover letter explains more about who you are as a person and your qualifications or your qualities. So the resume is like your qualities. The cover letter is your qualifications. And that's what you're going to talk about during the interview. So the cover letter is about your intentions and your qualities as an employee. The resume is just about your qualifications that you can put into titles, degrees, work experience. What's a statement of purpose or an SOP? If you apply for a graduate school, you want to go get a master's or PhD, you're going to write a statement of purpose, or like a personal statement. For graduate school, it's for master's or PhD, we call it a statement of purpose and SOP. And we will talk about those later also. So again, what are some stylistic and structural differences? Business letters, again, the paragraphing is different. It's single space, and you have what's called block paragraphs. So academic writing has indented paragraphs. You've got an indent, a tab space, and it's kind of like double line spacing. Now business writing is different because you don't have paragraph indents. The paragraph is like a block, and we'll see examples when we look at cover letters later. And cover letters for a resume or a CV, same. So everything is single space, but there's an extra space between paragraphs, and that's how you kind of make it more visually readable. You have an extra space between paragraphs. The paragraphs are single spaced, no indents, just looks like a block. So we call it block paragraphs, unlike the indented double-spaced paragraphs of academic writing. Resumes, well, what are some style differences you might notice? Well, if you look at a resume, one thing you'll notice is incomplete sentences. You don't use complete sentences. Use phrases or incomplete sentences, like managed accounting department for 10 years. Okay, incomplete sentences. Kind of things like lists and bullet points, maybe short phrases and just very, very, very brief, concise descriptions of your accomplishments and your history. Same thing for CV, of course, except it has more stuff, which we'll talk about later. Cover letter, it follows a business letter writing style, block paragraphs. And we'll see that there are certain things that are expected in the cover letter. Your address, your contact information at the top, the date, then probably the address of the person, the recipient to whom you're writing the letter. So we see this maybe next time. Your address, your contact information, probably including phone numbers and email, the date, and then the recipient. If you don't know who the recipient is, it's maybe like personnel department at Samsung or something like that. Then you have a greeting. We'll see greetings later. Dear madams or sirs. Hello. And then body paragraphs and signature. We'll see that structure later. Statement of purpose is kind of similar, as we'll see. Somewhat of a business letter or cover letter format, but longer and more academic in nature. Also here in the first page of chapter 12, I've got a list of some other kinds of writing, kind of professional academic styles or genres that you might encounter or have to do, especially if you go to graduate school. So a few of you are maybe going to graduate school, so let's talk a little bit about these. You're in graduate school and you start to do research, and your professor will hopefully encourage you, if it's good research, hey, present it at a conference, an academic conference. So you are going to write it up in the form of like a short 1 or 2 paragraph kind of abstract or proposal. It's kind of similar. An abstract is a summary of some work, assuming that maybe you've kind of done it and you kind of know what the results are. Or proposal is more like intention, like this is what I'm going to do. But they're kind of similar. Conference proposal. Some conferences you actually turn in a paper which is a short summary of your work, maybe 2 or 4 pages. Sometimes longer, like a literature conference can be longer. So it's a summary of your work. Now often a conference is maybe preliminary, your preliminary findings. So it's okay just to present some preliminary findings at a conference. This is what I've got so far. Once you finish your data analysis or your research, you might write it up in the form of a longer journal article and submit it to an academic research journal, a scholarly journal. And that's hopefully common, especially if you're trying to get an academic job. You want some publications on your CV to say, hey, I am a good scholar. Now your first little kind of baby research project will be a master's thesis. You do some research under the guidance of a professor. And it may not be great. You're a newbie, a new person, a beginner. Newbie is slang for like a beginner, a new person. This is newbie research, so it doesn't have to be great. It's going to be a research project, and it may not be that groundbreaking or innovative, but it's like your beginning research project and results in a kind of a long paper, maybe 20 to 50 pages long, maybe 80 pages long. Then you go on to your PhD. Now, in some programs, between your master's and PhD, you might have some kind of comprehensive exam or qualifying exam, test over all that you should have learned in your master's program. That depends. Then maybe before you start working on your PhD dissertation, there are a couple of things. One is a proposal, like this is my topic for the topic I want to do for my PhD dissertation. It can be a few pages long, and you're going to explain, okay, why are you doing this? Why do you want to do research on this? Kind of what's the background? What's kind of maybe a very brief lit review, a very short summary of the lit past research on the topic, and then this is what I want to do for my PhD and why. And then after that, you probably have at least one exam. It's called a preliminary exam or prelim exam. It's kind of a test over your proposal, and it's a pretty heavy experience. Now, in my case, I had 2 prelim exams because my department is kind of broad. So this really depends on the department you're in. So I first had some general questions about my particular research topic. They gave me the questions, and I spent a week at my home. It was a whole week exam. And basically, in response to questions from my committee of professors, I looked up a lot of research, then typed it up into about a 20 or 30 page paper. So it's like a 20 or 30 page kind of written exam. A lot of fun. You should try it, really. And then after that, a couple of months after that, I had a second prelim, which was more specific questions about my research topic and my research ideas. And again, a week at home on the computer, madly typing up and finding all the sources I can, finding good answers, and again, another 20 or 30 page essay in response to their questions. Lots of fun. You got to try it, really. Then do your research and you write up your dissertation, finally your PhD thesis. And depending on the department or your field, it could be 100 pages, 200, 300 pages. In humanities, maybe you could write some really hugely long 500-page dissertation, which I don't recommend. It's not fun. Okay. If you are having to get research money, you may have to apply for a research grant. We'll talk a little bit about research grants later, or a research proposal. If you're applying for any kind of academic job, research job, teaching job, you might turn in a CV instead of a resume. We'll talk about CVs later. If it's a college, university job, you might, depending on the kind of college, you might also provide a teaching statement or teaching philosophy statement. We'll talk a little bit about those. It's kind of an explanation of your teaching methods and your teaching philosophy, and maybe some examples of how you teach, especially for a university that's more concerned with teaching rather than research. If it's a university that's more of a major research university, you probably provide a research statement, which is a summary of your recent research accomplishments and what you're going to do as a new professor. This is the research I'm going to do as a new professor in order to apply for a job as a professor. Then, of course, research articles. We talked a bit about that. Okay, you're applying for a job. We'll start with cover letters. What things do you put in a cover letter? What are the components of a cover letter? Take a look at the examples in the book. What are the components of a cover letter? What elements or contents do you put in a cover letter to make it effective? How do you make it effective? What kind of stuff do you talk about? Your hobbies, how great you are. What do you talk about in a cover letter? What are some common mistakes in resumes and cover letters, especially cover letters? What are common mistakes that people make? Discuss for a while.